Breaking tonight, Iceland just experienced exactly what Canada warned the world about, and their reaction reveals everything about the choice facing mid-sized democracies in 2026. What happens when American jokes about annexation stop being funny? Iceland is finding out right now, and the answer should terrify anyone who values sovereignty. Reykjavik, January the 16th, 2026. William Long, Trump's freshly nominated ambassador to Iceland, stood on the House floor in Washington and delivered what he thought was harmless banter. Iceland would become the 52nd state, he told colleagues, and he'd be governor. The reaction in Iceland's capital was instant and volcanic. Within 24 hours, nearly 5,000 Icelanders signed a petition demanding their foreign minister reject Long's nomination. For context, Iceland's entire population is 400,000 people. That's more than 1% of the nation mobilizing against a single joke in a single day. Translation: Iceland just discovered what Canadians learned months ago. When Trump's circle jokes about making your country an American state, it's not actually a joke. And what happened next reveals exactly why the sovereignty crisis facing Western democracies is accelerating faster than anyone predicted. Dear viewers, between November 2024 and January 2026, something extraordinary happened in North American diplomatic relationships. Trump threatened Canada with 51st state annexation repeatedly. Canadian media covered it as entertainment. And Mark Carney, strategic and serious, recognized the pattern before anyone else. This isn't just about one ambassador's poor judgment. This is about the fundamental collapse of American respect for Allied sovereignty and the rise of imperial thinking as the new default in Washington's approach to smaller democracies. Remember Trump's exact words about Canada? Many Canadians want to be the 51st state. He said it at Mar-a-Lago. He posted it on Truth Social. He repeated it to reporters with cameras rolling. Canadian officials initially dismissed it as Trump being Trump. But Carney saw something different. He recognized that when powerful nations start joking about annexing their neighbors, historical precedent suggests those jokes have a way of becoming policy. Iceland just learned this lesson the hard way. Sigmar Gudmundsson, an Icelandic MP, told the newspaper Morgunblaðið something that should be required reading in Ottawa. It goes without saying that this is extremely serious for a small country like Iceland. We must realize that all the security arguments that the Americans make against Greenland also apply to Iceland. Let that sink in for a moment. Iceland, population 400,000 far Mizut instantly recognized that Trump's Greenland obsession establishes a precedent that threatens every strategically located democracy. If the United States can justify seizing Greenland for national security, what stops them from applying identical logic to Iceland or Canada? The answer, increasingly, is nothing. And this is precisely why Carney's strategic pivot away from American economic dependency wasn't political theater. It was survival instinct. Iceland's foreign ministry immediately contacted the U.S. Embassy to verify the veracity of Long's comments. Translation: they needed to know whether this represented official American thinking or just one individual's stupidity. The fact that they had to ask that question tells you everything about how dramatically trust has collapsed. Trump didn't just threaten Greenland. He called anything less than U.S. control unacceptable. He refused to rule out military force, and this week he suggested imposing tariffs on countries that don't support his annexation plans. Read that again. The President of the United States is threatening economic punishment against allies who oppose his territorial expansion. This isn't 19th century imperialism. This is 21st century imperialism with trade policy as the weapon. And Canada, sharing the world's longest undefended border with this administration, faces the exact same threat matrix Iceland is now discovering. European nations responded by sending military personnel to Greenland at Denmark's request. Small numbers, symbolic gestures, but the message was clear. Denmark won't surrender territory without a fight, and Europe won't abandon Denmark to face American pressure alone. Where was Canada in that equation? Conspicuously silent. And that silence, dear viewers, is precisely what Carney's reshaping of Canadian strategic policy aims to eliminate. Because when your largest trading partner starts threatening annexation, and your traditional approach is to stay quiet and hope it passes, you don't have a foreign policy, you have a survival strategy based on prayer. William Long apologized eventually. He told Arctic Today his comments were nothing serious, just jokes among friends who were kidding about Jeff Landry becoming governor of Greenland. Notice what he didn't say? He didn't say the idea was ridiculous. He didn't say American expansion into sovereign democracies was unthinkable. He just said he was joking. The Icelandic petition calling for his rejection specifically noted that his words may have been spoken in a half-hearted manner, but they are offensive to Iceland and Icelanders, who have had to fight for their freedom and have always been friends of the United States. There's that word again, friends. Iceland has been a loyal American ally. They host a critical NATO airbase at Keflavik. They've supported American foreign policy for decades, and their reward for that friendship is a nominee for ambassador who jokes about annexation. Canada, meet your future if the old dependency model continues. At a January 12th press conference about Greenland, just days before Long's comments, Iceland's Foreign Minister Katrín Gunnarsdóttir was asked directly, "Are you frightened about being next T on the schedule?" Her answer, "No, I wouldn't assume so. Not yet, at least." Not yet. Think about the strategic calculation embedded in those two words. Iceland's top diplomat couldn't say, "Absolutely not," when asked if her country might be targeted for American annexation. The best she could offer was, "Not yet." That's where unchecked American imperial thinking has brought us. Allied democracies can't confidently assert their own permanent sovereignty when discussing American intentions. And this is exactly the strategic reality Carney recognized when he started rebuilding Canadian relationships with Europe, Asia, and Latin America. When your primary security partner makes you doubt your own territorial integrity, diversification isn't optional. It's existential. Gudmundsson, the Icelandic MP, identified the core issue with devastating clarity. Long's jokes signal growing disrespect in the US toward the sovereignty of smaller states. Smaller states. That's the category Canada occupies in Washington's current calculation, regardless of our G7 status or economic power. Population-wise, California has nearly as many people as Canada despite being a single state. Military spending? The Pentagon's budget alone approaches half of Canada's entire GDP. Strategic importance? Trump's team clearly views Canadian resources and territory as American assets waiting to be claimed. The pattern is identical whether you're Iceland, Greenland, or Canada. First, American officials joke about annexation. Then, they frame it as mutual benefit, not conquest. Next, they invoke national security to justify increased pressure. Finally, they threaten economic consequences for resistance. Iceland is currently between steps 1 and 2. Greenland is at step 3. Canada experienced step 1 repeatedly and is now watching to see if Trump's administration moves to step 2. And Carney's response has been to systematically remove Canada from that escalation ladder entirely by building economic and diplomatic relationships that don't depend on American approval. Nearly 5,000 Icelanders signed a petition demanding their government reject Long's nomination. That's a remarkable number for a nation of 400,000, achieved within 24 hours of the comments becoming public. The petition's language is instructive. It calls Long's remarks offensive to Iceland and Icelanders, and demands the United States nominate another person who shows Iceland and Icelanders more respect. Notice what Iceland isn't doing? They're not accepting the apology and moving on. They're not treating this as an innocent mistake. They're demanding accountability and respect as preconditions for diplomatic relations. That's exactly the posture Carney has been advocating for Canada in its relationship with Washington. Not hostility, not separation, but conditional engagement based on mutual respect rather than assumed subordination. When Iceland demands respect, the world watches. When Canada demands respect, the continent shifts. Here's what the Iceland situation reveals about Canada's strategic position. American jokes about annexation represent genuine imperial thinking, not harmless banter. Iceland's reaction confirms what Canadian analysts suspected. These comments reflect deeper assumptions about American entitlement to allied territory. Mid-sized democracies can't rely on historical friendship to protect sovereignty. Iceland has been a loyal ally for generations. That loyalty bought them exactly zero protection from annexation jokes by their incoming ambassador. European allies are willing to defend each other's sovereignty with military deployments. When Denmark faced Greenland pressure, European nations sent personnel. When Canada faced 51st state threats, international support was limited to diplomatic statements. Small nations are recognizing they need collective defense against American pressure. Iceland isn't facing this alone. They're part of a broader pattern affecting Greenland, Panama Canal discussions, and Canada. The question is whether mid-sized democracies will coordinate response or face pressure individually. And this is precisely why Carney's diplomatic reset with Europe, formalization of Pacific partnerships, and economic diversification away from American dependency aren't reactive panic. They're strategic preparation for a world where American friendship no longer guarantees sovereignty, protection. Iceland's response to Long's nomination carries a clear message for every Canadian watching this unfold. Sovereignty isn't defended by hoping allies respect it. Sovereignty is defended by making the cost of challenging it too high to contemplate. Iceland demanded Long's rejection within 24 hours. They mobilized 1% of their population in a day. They contacted the U.S. Embassy for verification. They made clear that diplomatic relationships depend on mutual respect, not American convenience. Canada's response to 51st state threats, polite objections, quiet diplomacy, and hope that Trump's attention would shift elsewhere. One of these approaches treats sovereignty as non-negotiable. The other treats it as a topic for patient discussion. And the difference between those approaches will determine whether Canada enters 2026 as an independent nation, charting its own course, or as a territory waiting for Washington to formalize what Trump's team already assumes. Iceland's parliament will likely debate Long's nomination extensively. Their foreign ministry is already investigating his comments. The petition will continue growing, and Iceland will send an unmistakable message. Even America's smallest allies won't accept annexation jokes from incoming ambassadors. Meanwhile, Canada faces its own calculation. Trump's administration is settling in. His team has made their assumptions about Canadian sovereignty clear. And the choice Ottawa makes in the coming months will either reinforce Carney's independence strategy or validate Trump's assumption that Canada is American territory in all but name. Iceland chose resistance within 24 hours. Canada has been deliberating for months. The question isn't whether Trump's team will continue testing sovereignty boundaries. They've made that strategy explicit. The question is whether Canada will defend those boundaries with Iceland's intensity or accept them with diplomatic silence. Because, dear viewers, when your ambassador jokes about making you the 52nd state, that's not a diplomatic incident. That's a statement of intent wrapped in plausible deniability. Iceland recognized it immediately. When will Canada? If you believe sovereignty matters, if you think mid-sized democracies deserve respect, if you recognize that Carney's strategic independence represents Canada's best path forward, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We're tracking every development in Canada's transformation from American dependency to a strategic autonomy. And the next few months will determine which path Ottawa ultimately chooses. The choice Iceland just made in 24 hours, Canada needs to make that same choice, and the clock is running.